Delighted to say I'm joined by the Housing Minister, Matthew Pennycook. Very good morning to you, Minister.
Morning.
I want to get to your announcements today, but a couple of key stories to get to first of all. The first being on the Middle East. Clearly, a greater number of US and indeed British forces are being sent to the area, I guess, in preparation. If the US decided to directly get involved, would the UK follow suit?
You'll forgive me, Wolf, I'm not going to speculate on hypotheticals and, in particular, comment on potential operational decisions that may or may not happen. The UK government's position is very clear. This is obviously a really concerning and destabilising moment in the region. We are calling on both sides to step back. We're urging restraint. It's in no one's interest to escalate this conflict further.
We're a complete bystander in that regard, aren't we? The Prime Minister yesterday's rhetoric said he expected Donald Trump to be calling for a truce and overnight kind of tweeting the opposite.
Well, I'm not going to comment, as always happens on these occasions, on President Trump's social media feed. I would point you to the G7 statement, very clear commitment there to peace and stability in the region. But the UK government's position is very clear, as I said. It's in no one's interest to see this conflict escalate. We are urging with all our partners in the region restraint on both sides and for both sides to step back from the brink and give diplomacy a chance.
Again, I just ask, I mean, on that front, do we honestly have much influence on this?
I think we do have influence in the region, absolutely, and along with the G7 pushing that commitment to peace and stability in the region, I think that's important. Again, it is in everyone's interests to show restraint and to step back from the brink. Lots of regional partners are pushing that message alongside the UK. There is in no one's interest for this to widen into a full-scale regional war. Just
finally, regime change, if it materialised, is that something actually that the UK government, kind of methods aside, would welcome?
Well, I mean, I think the UK government's position on the regime in Tehran is clear. You can be incredibly critical of that theocratic regime. You can understand that Iran poses a threat to the UK. Sanctions are obviously already in place, and we're particularly worried about its nuclear programme and what that will do to peace and security in the region. But as I say, when it comes to this instance, and I think the two are entirely compatible, it is appropriate for us to be pushing for restraint and for both sides to step back from the brink.
Let's touch next on your new housing bank, National Housing Bank. Talk us through that.
So alongside £5 billion in new capital funding for housing, we're announcing today our commitment to create a new national housing bank to accelerate house building across the UK. So this will be a government-owned public finance institution. It will have the autonomy and the freedoms to be able to deploy loans, equity and guarantees to get development going in different parts of the country. So standing behind it is £16 billion worth of new funding. And because of the way it's constituted and how it will operate, it will earn a long-term return for government. So it'll make a series of interventions, whether they be low-cost, low-interest loans to social housing providers or guarantees that de-risk more complex projects and bring in private finance. But it will make a significant contribution to house building rates across the country over its lifetime. We estimate over 500,000 homes supported by this. And in this Parliament, our estimates that will help support the delivery of just under 60,000 homes, contributing to that 1.5 million plan for change target.
So this is essentially to give private developers more confidence that the projects will be seen through from start to finish?
So it's a range of... the institution will sit under Homes England, which is our national housing and regeneration agency. It will give Homes England the autonomy, the freedom to be able to deploy, in a much more flexible way than it can do now, a range of interventions. So, as I said, low-interest loans to social housing providers, other guarantees, and in instances, particularly on complex development projects, where guarantees can be put in place that de-risk those projects, that allow private investment to flood in. And we estimate that the bank will bring in more than £50 billion worth of investment to attract that in and support house building in a way that we can't do now because of the way that Homes England is constituted, some of the controls that are in place. So this is a really big announcement coming out of the spending review. As I said, will allow us to make a significant additional contribution on top of the planning reforms we've announced, on top of our planning and infrastructure bill, on top of that significant £39 billion of investment in social and affordable housing announced at the spending review, help us get to that 1.5 million target.
Small boats, the crossings have hit just shy of 17,000 this year. It's up 50% on where we were at the same moment last year. Is it fair to say that so far, a year or so into government, that the government's failed in this area?
I don't think that's the case. We always recognised And I would take you back to the inheritance here. We've inherited an immigration and asylum system in complete chaos. We've got to restore order, but there was never going to be a quick overnight fix on this. And we are taking action in a variety of areas. Our Borders Bill is making its way through the Commons. That will give the enforcement agencies counter-terror style powers. We're making other changes. In particular, and I've seen reported over recent days, this quite bizarre fact that French police, due to current law in France, cannot intervene in shallow waters. If a boat is just 10 yards, off sea in shallow waters, the French police can't wade in. We are negotiating for the first time changes with the French authorities that will allow them to intervene. So we are making a series of changes, but I recognise it's an incredibly challenging situation. There's no quick overnight fix, but we are making progress, and we do think we are able to rapidly bear down. Again, let's get to the root of the problem
You're
here.
not
on
rapidly
those
bearing down.
Over the Parliament, I think we will, once
year.
these changes are in place. But as I said, legislation is going through the House of Commons now. We're making those changes with the French authorities.
With due respect, Minister, to claim you're rapidly bearing down and to cite once again the inheritance when we're a full year, essentially, into your term in office, and it's not like the numbers have persisted. They're 50% worse.
No, and I recognise the challenge.
But that is thus far, that's failure.
But I don't accept that, because we have to, as I said, there's no overnight fix to this. We have to put in place the measures that will allow us, and I do believe this will happen in due course, to rapidly bring down numbers, because once that Borders Bill becomes law, once we have made those changes to, I've given you a very specific example there, French law stopping French police and enforcement agencies getting into the water to stop these boats coming. So some of these things are coming through, and then I think we will see. But I recognise absolutely, and we're very candid about the fact, the inheritance was dire. We never said we were going to fix it overnight. It is an incredibly challenging problem to bear down on, because these smuggler gangs who are making huge amounts of money off human misery are deeply, deeply entrenched because of a lack of action over recent years.
I mean, it's interesting. I think some people would be worried that you don't see it as failure thus far, given what it might mean for your expectations going forward. Let's touch on PMQs today and the scale of tough questions you're expecting on the grooming scandal. I have two real focus questions, rather than getting into the politics of which side should have done more or not. When will we know the exact remit of the National Statutory Inquiry, its timeline, and who will lead it?
Well, and just to make a point on the politicisation, because I think you're right, we do need to remove some of the politics in it. And I think it was very struck by Louise Casey's comments in that regard. We've got to have the victims at the forefront of our mind when discussing this. We want to bring forward details on that national inquiry as soon as possible. As you know, what
We're talking about weeks or months?
Well, hopefully in the very near future, because I think victims in particular, in terms of seeking that accountability that they deserve, would want details of what's to come forward. But just for your viewers, I think it's important to clarify what that inquiry would be. And we're setting up here an independent commission that will oversee not a J-style inquiry that will take years and years and years to make its recommendations. This is a national inquiry that will sit behind those local investigations and inquiries. And Louise Kay agreed with us that it's important that they proceed, but will coordinate and give those inquiries through statutory powers, the means they need to get to the truth.
OK, so we'll wait to hear when we might get those details of the inquiry. I guess the final question, again, I don't want to go into Labour versus Conservative on this, who could and should have done more sooner. It's interesting, on reflection, that the Prime Minister hasn't retracted, suggesting that calling for a national inquiry is jumping on a far-right bandwagon. It might have been said in relation to specific Tory MPs, but they were words that cut through nationwide, including with the victims, as we've heard across multiple airways over the course of the last couple of days. Again, I don't understand why someone can't pause and say, look, in retrospect, I regret those words because of the ways that they were the way they're interpreted. And how do you feel as you sit here on that? Essentially, either you're saying we have jumped on a far-right bandwagon because we've introduced this particular policy that people were calling for, or say those words were a mistake in the first place.
Well, no, because I think, and you rightly highlighted the point yourself, those words were made in connection specifically with ministers in the previous government that the Prime Minister felt had jumped on the bandwagon in a way that wasn't appropriate.
So that's fine. But I've gone through those quotes in full with your colleagues over the last couple of days. I guess the final point in that is to say that you are glad those words were said.
Well, but I would also draw your attention to other words he said. For example, in Parliament in January, he said reasonable people can take a different position on whether a national inquiry is appropriate and what kind of inquiry it is. But I just draw you back to the fact that we've taken very robust and quick action to bear down on child exploitation and group child exploitation. And we specifically appointed Louise Casey to undertake this audit, to get at the truth as to whether we needed a national inquiry. And she's confirmed that, yes, not a national inquiry of the kind that Jay was, that we were worried about in terms of the timeline and what that would mean for victims, but an independent commission that's going to, as I say, sit behind and coordinate those local inquiries and get to the truth and get some accountability and redress very, very sooner than we would from a full type of inquiry that we saw under Jay 7 years plus.
All points that I discussed at length vociferously with Chris Philp the other day, but you're glad that the far-right bandwagon words were used 6 months ago by the Prime Minister?
Well, but the Prime Minister chose those words, as I say, in relation to specifically previous ministers in the last Parliament that he felt had jumped on a bandwagon in a way that wasn't helpful. Again, I'd come back to the fact victims have got to be at the heart of this. I think it's right that we take the temperature out and depoliticise this. The whole country should be coming behind the recommendations that Louise Casey made and this national inquiry that will support with that local footprint, those local inquiries to get to the truth.
Matthew Pennycook, great to see you as always. Thanks for joining us very much.